You don't have to have a large audience to make money from your podcast. I know that sounds absolutely mind-blowing because everybody talks about downloads and how many watches and how many listens and how many da 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 da. Well, we're going to tell you that that's the truth. And Caroline is going to tell you a little bit more from an expert space because you all know that this is definitely the tip of the iceberg for me. So, Caroline, I'm going to invite you in here to be my expert to tell people a little bit more about you, why this matters to you, and why it should matter to everyone else.
Juicy questions. Well, first of all, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And I like to say that almost like polarizing thing that like you don't have to have this big audience to launch your podcast or to make money from your podcast, because as a podcast coach, I hear that all the time. People are like, I'm not ready yet. Like I don't have enough followers on Instagram, or, I'm not making enough money in my business yet, so I shouldn't make the podcast. It's like, well, the podcast will make you the money in your business. And so my production company, Get a Helmet Studio, we produce podcasts for women in business, and we create video content for them as well. And then my personal brand, I have a podcast course called Spoken, and I walk you through every single step of doing and launching and creating your podcast on your own, more of like a DIY approach. And this helps kind of get all that fear out of the way, because there's a lot of overwhelm that comes up for people with like the tech, or like, I don't have the time, I'm not ready to do this. And so I've been saying this specific line that you just said a lot lately, and people have been really responding, because I think it's something that holds us back from sharing our voice and sharing our story and launching our podcast, because we're like, well, I've got to have a bunch of downloads and a big audience for these big brands to want to work with me. But there's something else that you can do before you even get brand sponsorships or have ads on your podcast. It's like, we think that's the way to make money. That's a beautiful way. You totally can. But you can also sell your own offers on your podcast. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure that that's something that you're pointing people to as well. And there's so much to say on it, but my journey showed me that.
And then of course you're showering that on everyone else, but like that's not even the beautiful thing about that is that it's actually I'm actually a part of a bigger program right now, and it's really teaching me a lot about perspective. And one of the things that I want people to remember here that I've been learning through this program is the sentence, not does this apply to me, but how does this apply to me? Because even if you're not starting a podcast, that concept of,
Yes.
oh, well, I'm not ready yet, or it's not quite, well, when this happens, then I'll do this.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, unfortunately, people are aligning that with like happiness, with like actually their like internal beliefs about themselves.
Definitely.
And that winds up being a problem. And so really, I mean, and these are a variety of different layers of being. And your program is helping people to navigate this space so that you don't need to wait to be happy. You don't need to wait to be successful. You don't need to wait to launch your podcast.
Definitely. Definitely. I think it's so interesting too, because when you get down to the root of that fear of I'm not ready, or when I achieve this thing, then I'll go do this other thing. It's really fear of failure, or honestly, fear of success is what I've seen a lot more.
Love that.
Is what if, what happens if I do have thousands and thousands of listeners on my podcast? Then I'm more of a target to be made fun of or to be ridiculed. It's more vulnerable. And I've kind of noticed this for myself in so many areas, because I think as an entrepreneur, as a creator, showing up, putting your work out into the world, like it's a spiritual experience. Like it's a healing experience if you allow it to be. And so I've noticed all these little limiting beliefs hiding in the corners of my nervous system, and my past and all of it. It just brings it all to the surface. And you just have to say, what am I waiting for? What am I actually waiting for? It's like nothing.
What am I waiting for? That's beautiful too. And it's the kick in the pants oftentimes we need.
Yes, definitely.
So if anybody's watching right now, like here's your kick in the pants. What are you waiting for? We are waiting for you to show up, to do the thing, to start the podcast.
And so are your people, your most aligned clients, your soulmate like community. They're out there right now calling you into their lives. They're wondering, I wonder if there's somebody out there who teaches this, but is kind of like this. It's like that thing that makes you who you are. And nobody's going to find you if you don't tell people about it, if you don't shout it from the rooftops, if you don't turn your microphone on. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this work.
I love that. And I'm often telling people along that same vein is, you got to fly your freak flag. Like,
Yes.
don't be afraid of both failure and success. You need to fly that freak flag, because there are people who have that same, or at least a similar freak flag tucked away in a closet, and they're sitting on their hands right now, waiting for somebody else to do it so that they can join you and celebrate with you, to congregate around this, whatever notion it is that's lighting you up.
Absolutely. I think that the more that you can dive into your authenticity and really allow it to be at the forefront of everything that you do, that's where the magnetism is. That's where everything opens up for you, because to me, that's the energy of the universe. It's like when you're in alignment with your authentic self, that's when all of the things come your way. So, I mean, if you're kind of hiding behind, well, I don't really want to act like that, then I think when you do actually let yourself act like that and be that version of yourself, that's when all your people are going to show up.
Absolutely. And so, and this is particularly important for people in entrepreneurship, I believe, because you've got people coming from corporate, or you've got people with an idea of what it means to be a business person or a
Totally. Yes.
right? And so we're looking at podcasting in particular, because this is a very, it's a booming industry. You've got audio, you've got video, you've got a lot of community building around it. It's a great way to make something more lucrative in a variety of different ways, like income stream wise.
Totally.
So how then, like, other than like that was just my gloss over, but tell me a little bit more based on your expertise about how podcasting in particular is such a powerful space for somebody in entrepreneurship to be as both a host and a guest.
As both a host and a guest. Absolutely. Well, my first thought is that, your podcast episodes, they live on in this library, because if you're a podcast listener, anybody listening to this, which you are, if you're listening to this, the nature of listening to podcasts is, okay, I find a show that looks kind of cool, or I see this person's name on this show that looks kind of cool. And then you scroll through, or you're looking for something specific. It's treated as just like a library right there for you, versus social media. Sometimes we'll find somebody on Instagram, you can kind of scroll through and watch stuff, but it's less searchable on social media. So you're pouring your heart into this content creation, and it's kind of lasting like 24 to 48 hours. Like the life cycle is super short.
If that.
And then so your podcast episodes, I mean, honestly, people are still listening to my podcast episodes from 7 years ago. And, then you get into the conversation around like dynamic ad insertion and kind of going into the back catalog of your podcast and popping in new ads that are promoting your current offers to an episode that's from 5 years ago, right? So there's all of these ways that podcasting just kind of the domino effect. It's like you have a guest on your podcast, their whole audience, I mean, a lot of their audience are going to want to listen to that person. Then they find you. Then they find your podcast. Then they find everybody else on your podcast. It's just this big domino effect. So hopefully that answers your question. I mean, it's just like, it's such a powerful platform. And to me, it feels like you can really stay in your zone of genius, because it's just you and your microphone, or you and the person that you want to interview, versus being on social media or wherever and just hearing all this noise of like, show up this way, be this way, look this way. And like, shh, just like let us share our authentic voices. And I just have recently kind of unfollowed a bunch of people on Instagram, and just like, because the vibe of podcasting is so like, it's me and my people. It's me and my people. We can really connect. And so I'm trying to recreate that as much as I can on social.
I love that, because it's truly community building. And this is actually something that, so what you're saying 100% is in alignment with all the things that I'm doing, because I do, of course, function in social media as well. I really promote that sort of content marketing, because that's a really great way to organically grow your business.
Totally.
And pulling in those notions of community building around a common thread is a really important part of growing intentionally on socials. And what I was also hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard a lot about, and now you didn't use these words, but audience sharing.
Yeah.
So I hear that. And this is a superpower that anybody can tap into through the power of networking, through the power of meeting people, and then combining your efforts to share one piece of content across a variety of platforms. And when you do so intentionally, podcasting being an amazing way to do that, you can 10x your audience, your right fit audience.
Yes. Yes.
That's amazing.
It's so powerful. And I think my brain already kind of works this way just because as a producer working in film production, that's my whole career, right? So like prior to getting into entrepreneurship and the mindset of, oh, the right director and the right sound designer and the right actor for this, and just always kind of thinking like, who can I connect with who? That is my default way of thinking. So when I'm launching something, when I'm just trying to build my community and connect with people online, I'm constantly thinking, what can we do for each other? Like, how can we support each other? And why don't we do a podcast episode or a podcast swap or an Instagram live, or do an Instagram live and publish it to your podcast, like, or a freebie swap. Like, I'm always down for the collaboration, because that's just, to me, that feels so deeply human. And then yes, you're doing this like very organic audience sharing, which is wonderful, in addition to building your own audience, which you can totally do. But why not just like try to amplify that a little bit more?
And this is my favorite. It's my absolute favorite, through being human.
Yeah.
That human connection. As soon as you said that, I just kind of, I need to do a little dance because it's part of being human. And I love it so much. Like that is the power. That is the power of podcasting and collaboration and actual making progress, both personally and professionally. Now, you did mention, though, your background in being a producer and working in video. And so that's something that, even for myself, I mean, we were talking about that fear of success, fear of failure. I definitely was in that boat. In particular, this fear of success bothered me more because failure to me feels like old hat. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but this idea of success was scary.
Yes.
And so one of the elements that was, I don't know what to call it. I don't want to necessarily call it an obstacle or a challenge, but it was something that I was considering. It was weighing on my mind.
Yeah.
Was the idea of video. The idea of showing up, because I want to. I enjoy showing up in video. I like seeing your face. I like seeing when I'm talking to people. I like to have that interactivity because, again, I love that authenticity and being human. But video is scary. So how can we incorporate that for anybody who is like, I want to do a podcast, and you know what? I'm in the same boat. I'd really like to do video, and I think this might be applicable to audio as well.
Yes.
How can we do that without the stress of, oh, but I don't know how? This is so challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. That same overwhelm, it gets in the way for podcasters for video. And, this is, I'm still very much a filmmaker, and all of my work incorporates the nervous system, because I think that, when we're showing up, putting ourselves out there, our art out there, our work out there, it's so edgy, it's so vulnerable. And so to get started, I mean, we have the capability of like a high quality video camera on our cell phones these days, right? So like for me, that took me a while to be okay with, but I've definitely come around where I'm like, all right, this is just the way of the world. Like, let's just use it to our advantage. And, playing with that in a way that feels just easeful, fun, just like film things that you think are beautiful to you, use them as B-roll for your reels. Like just if the lighting is beautiful, if something in nature is beautiful, just turn on your camera and just grab it, even without thinking of content creation or like, I have to make content. It's like, make it for fun. And then in terms of like filming yourself, people oftentimes get really, really nervous about being on camera. I say start small. If going live feels really scary, then do something pre-recorded. Then you can do a million takes. If it's going to help you feel comfortable your first time, then start there. And I also highly recommend doing some breath work or some dance to really shake out all of the nervous energy before you turn your camera on. And, if you're looking, I don't know what to say, or I'm not really sure, my voice, I stutter over my words. It's like, pick one question to answer and start there. For me, I feel like showing up live is easeful for me. Like and not a lot of people feel that way. And so they're like, how do you do it? And I'm like, I feel very much like when I can breathe into my body and just kind of allow my channel to be open and for things to come out, that's my best. That's when the best stuff comes out. But that's just kind of over like years and years of practice. If you're not quite there yet, then just answer one question, share one tip, Share one story and start there. So you're not thinking like, oh my gosh, what am I even going to say? And take the messy imperfect action. Like let yourself stutter over your words. The amount of times that I've done that, and like I tell all my new podcasters to like go listen to my old episodes because like the sound quality is bad, like there's lawnmowers going off in the background. Like, so what? Like obviously I don't want every episode to sound that way, but if it does in the moment, just like breathe into it. It's all good. You're allowed to make a mistake. It's okay.
I love that. I love that so much. And this is one of the reasons why, and I get a lot of guests coming on here. You're one of the unique ones who is like, let's just go. I love that. That's so perfect. But I get a lot of people who are like, oh, it's live. Whoo. And then I do the same thing as you. I said, okay. I said, raise your hands and shake them all the way down. And then roll out your shoulders and do a, and the reason, and then also just making sure that everybody knows the reason we go live is because I, in my space, encompass this authentic human space. And I make room for you to stutter over your words, for you to get a tickle in your throat and need a glass of water or whatever you're drinking. And I make room for a Freudian slip. Oh my goodness. If you say something that is a Freudian slip, not only am I going to probably giggle, we're also definitely keeping it in because we don't cut this ish out.
Yeah.
Because this is reality. This is what we do.
Yeah.
And I think that is such an important way to go about your life. And I wanted to add, you mentioned, and this is a direct, like this connects perfectly, is you mentioned when you see something beautiful in the world, just film it.
Yeah.
Just record it.
Yeah.
And this is a really important thing that actually social media influencer, Elise Myers, I love her to bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. She started to do, take a picture of the things that make you happy. And she just has like a whole roll of random images, but they made her happy in the moment. Like she literally had like, I want to say it was like a picture of a pigeon. Like, I don't know.
I love that.
Yes. And it gets you to recognize the things that are beautiful. And another conversation. I love conversations. Conversation starting. If you guys are ready to join, like absolutely talk. This is the start conversation. Keep the conversation going. Ask questions. Caroline and I have so many responses, and there are going to be a lot of people in our community who can contribute to the conversation as well. You will always find richness in these conversations. And so I'm going to say that a conversation that I had previously, it was either today or yesterday, was all about looking for glimmers.
Oh, yeah.
And then announcing them, because people will see something, oh, that's beautiful. But then they go to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Stop it.
Stay in the joy.
Yes, lean into it. And it will not only help you in your soul, it will also help you in your business and your marketing.
Absolutely. And it's funny as you're describing this, like, and this, being nervous to show up, and that nervousness is being in your head and out of your body. And like the quickest way to get back into your body is to just breathe into your belly. Mm-hmm. So, and that moment of silence, that like pause that it takes to feels like an eternity, but it's like a literal millisecond. So it's going to feel so intense for you to be like, oh, I kind of forget where my thoughts are going there. I'm going to take a breath. But if you do that, nobody's going to notice. Like, and what taught me this was teaching yoga classes. Like how do I say the right words and remember all these like Sanskrit words? Like, how am I going to do this? And I would get, the people would show up to class and it would be getting packed. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, like I've got to start this. I've got to lead this. These people are like all looking at me, and I'd have my class all planned out. And then inevitably I'd be like, oh man, did we already do this on this side? And I would just take a breath.
Yeah.
And then they would hold that posture for like a second longer. And then I'd be like, nope, we didn't. Just like take the beat, take the moment to actually breathe. It's okay.
Yeah. And I want to add to that to say, because you said nobody will notice, and 9 times out of 10, they won't. And I'm going to argue that if they do, it's probably a good thing, because this is you modeling that it's okay to do this, that you don't need to be stuck in hustle culture within your mind and in your environment. Definitely. It's okay to pause. Be a leader in doing what is right. You are an influencer and a role model in all aspects of how you're showing up in life and business.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that is the biggest, most beautiful leadership, is to show up and be vulnerable in your leadership. You can, and I've heard this from my coaches too. It's like, if you're feeling nervous about this thing, what if you showed up to your audience and said, feeling kind of nervous? What if, like, and then honestly, that's kind of all we need to do sometimes to just clear that energy. And then we're like, okay, cool. They still accept me and love me here. Like, just kind of trick your nervous system into it. And then you're like, I'm good. I'm off and running.
Absolutely. I did that actually just a little while ago. I did an Instagram live and I was like, hey guys, so I am having a day and I'm doing a thing that I do all the time. And for some reason today it's making me nervous. And that storytelling is really important to create that connection with your audience, which is something that we were talking about too, is just this idea of like, sure, you're showing up for a podcast, and whether it's scripted with questions or whether it's more organic, the way our conversation rolls, there's that element of storytelling that really allows your audience to dive deeper into everything that you're doing. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you help people to really infuse that into the way they're showing up within the podcast?
Ooh, yeah. I love that question. So, well, this is a lot of what we do inside of my core sessions, which are my storytelling intensives, but it all plays into the same thing. Because if you are showing up and have a brand, showing up and have a business, and then have a podcast, what you're speaking about on your podcast, and what you're speaking about in your business and in your content are hopefully going to be the same thing. Otherwise, you're doing too much work. So
That's fair.
so being able to, in these containers with my clients, spend 2 hours and get them into their body, and then do an interview where I'm asking them specific questions that I've kind of learned and become familiar with doing documentary film work, where I'm like trying to unearth the story. Like, what are we actually working with here? What makes you unique? What lights you up? What's the big highest vision? If anything were possible, what would you be doing? Who would be around you? Who would you be helping? What kind of art would you be making? And, when you create a safe space for somebody to actually say those things and take up space saying them, the beauty comes out. So we do that. And then it's kind of like taking all of that information and then shaping it into your overarching kind of brand stories and pillars for content creation, so that it's a lot easier for your brain, rather than saying, what the heck am I going to post today? And what do I even do? Like, a lot of people don't even know how to say what they do. And so when you can really get into the nitty-gritty of, this is my journey, this is my story, and understand that in your bones, it's usually very similar to your dream client's story. So when you share this, your dream clients are like reading your content or watching your videos or listening to your podcast, and they're like, oh my God, wait, that's me. And that's what you want people to be saying. You want people to be like, it's like you were reading my mind, right? So usually that's hidden in like your own journey and story.
It's so good. I just looked around my person, because there was a time when I was doing videos in my Facebook community, which still exists and provides like organic marketing support, much like a paid marketing community, but it's free, where I pop in there and I just give tips and tricks and advice, and you get to ask me questions for free. Super fun. But my point is, I used to have a pencil that had a little sticky note on it, and I would wave it when somebody was saying something that was like on point. So I was like, I want to wave a flag for all that you're saying right now, because it's just so perfect, because brand messaging is at the root of everything that you're doing. And I'm going to argue that it's not just professionally, it's also personally. Because like you say, your story is probably very much in alignment with the story of your right fit client.
Yes, definitely.
So tapping into that, tapping into your core values, tapping into what it means to show up as you, to experience these problems and to experience the resolution of these problems, and that transformation in between, so rich and full. And using storytelling and it really is just that connective tissue that brings everybody together.
It is. That's why I started my first podcast 7 years ago. That's why I was sharing my mental health journey and my ups and downs with anxiety and healing anxiety. And I had no intention of starting a business. I didn't even really know what entrepreneurship was at that point. And then I started having these conversations on my podcast, and people started coming to me and saying, thank you so much for sharing that. Like, that changed my whole day. And then people started asking me, how did you stop your panic attacks? How did you regulate your breath? How did you do this? And then I started coaching, and I created my first offer, and then I started selling it on my podcast. And I made $5,000 as soon as I started to do that. And I didn't have a big audience. I had under 1,000 listeners, and I had no brand sponsorships, no ads. I didn't even know, like, podcasting hadn't even really taken off yet. And then now, from then to now, it's just like, the universe plays tricks on you in that way where you're like, feeling really called to do this thing, but I'm not really sure why. And like, it doesn't really make any sense on paper. But
Mm.
then, now looking back 7 years down the road, I'm like, oh, I was just being taught everything there is to know about podcasting. So I can then help other women launch their podcasts and share their voice.
That's massive. And then, you know what, on that note, I'm going to invite you to share the cherry on top, some final notes, because I feel like at this point, we could go down a rabbit hole. So instead of doing that, we're going to take a breath and share some last points. And also, of course, tell people how they can get in touch with you and what are their next steps.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I'll say is that if any of this is resonating and if sharing your voice is feeling like you've had this burning desire to do it, launching a podcast, but you don't really know where to start, you can start with my free podcast launch starter guide. It is honestly so packed with information. It's an equipment list. It's a checklist of every single step. It's a workbook that helps you start to kind of open up, like, what would my podcast be about? What kind of conversations do I want to have? How can I point people to my business from my podcast? And within that, I mean, come follow me on Instagram. I'm super active on Instagram. I am CAROLYN Aylward. My podcast right now is called the Creative Visionary Podcast. So there's a lot going on over there. So these are great ways to plug in. I've got a lot of episodes about podcasting and how to get started and the creative process in general. And my podcast course, Spoken, is going to be enrolling very soon. We get started at the end of October. It's a 6-week-long program. It's live and it is so juicy. It will walk you through every single step of creating, launching, producing, monetizing your very own podcast.
Well, if that didn't just hit you in the face, I don't know what will. My goodness gracious. Okay, that is amazing. So you know what I'm going to do then? With that said, everybody has just taken amazing notes, right, everybody? And made sure that they've gotten all this stuff down, because this is hugely impactful for you and your business. And second of all, don't forget to check the show notes for all of those links so that you can actually access all the things that are available to you.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm going to take the time to invite you to make sure you give it 2 thumbs up. 2, make sure that you subscribe, because I do 2 of these a week and you want to have conversations like this because it's going to further your business. And then also, don't forget that you can absolutely join me on YouTube at Shauna Lee VM so that you can catch the trainings that I do in between. It's kind of a big deal. So with that, I'll give you guys all a big see you next time and we'll chat soon. Thank you very much again, CAROLYN, for being on the show.